Jimi Fritz, welcome to Grimerica. Thanks for joining us.
Nice to be here. Greetings from British Columbia.
Oh, you're in, yeah, I thought you were sort of part Canadian. I was wondering where you were from. Yeah.
Beautiful British Columbia. Yeah, I was born in England and grew up and went to school there, and then I started traveling a lot and ended up in BC, in Canada.
Whereabouts in BC?
In Victoria.
Okay, nice. Yeah. Island life.
That's right. You know Vancouver Island?
Yeah, a little bit. I used to live on there for when I was a kid for a bit, and I grew up in Vancouver, and then
okay.
I moved to Alberta and now to Saskatchewan. So
okay, cool.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, you know what's funny is I thought you were on a friend of mine, ours, their podcast, and I always thought, geez, that would be interesting to talk to this guy because I saw the title. It was your Confessions. Let me just find that. Confessions
of an ethical drug dealer.
Of an ethical drug dealer. And I thought, oh boy, that sounds pretty interesting.
Better find bookstores everywhere. It's a 50-year it's a journey both geographical and philosophical while sharing a half-century of ventures in buying, selling, and consuming psychedelic drugs. Along the way, we learn the difference between smart drugs and dumb drugs.
Right.
The truth about religion and how to make a perfect cup of tea.
Nice. And then I also noticed your Rave Culture. I mean, we had but I couldn't find that episode. I mean, I saw it pop up and I couldn't find it, so I don't even know which one it was. But either way, I wanted to talk to you, and then I'm glad that we finally connected. And I mean, the Rave Culture too. I was having a discussion with some friends, and they were talking about how. Yeah, I don't know if it was you, but they were talking about a researcher that did this sort of dive into, like, I guess it would be Ibiza, or however you pronounce that, and the beginning of that whole culture, I guess, would be in the late 80s or early 90s.
Yeah. That's all outlined in the book, the history of the culture and the history of the music, and it's a primer for the global rave phenomenon.
Right.
Written in the year 2000, so it's kind of it's a bit dated.
Right.
Kind of a historical document now.
Well, have you ever thought about, I mean, because hasn't the whole festival culture like come from that as well?
Well, it was a kind of rave culture was a continuation of, it started with a merge between the house music scene and the free party scene in England. Because there was a tradition in England at the time where people would set up sound systems in a farmer's field and do these impromptu parties, which would go till late. But this was before house music. So they weren't really raves. They were more like, underground. They're called free parties. It was a free party movement. So that was going on. And then house music came along and really took off in Ibiza. And that kind of married with the MDMA. And then it went north and came back into England and became the Summer of Love in '87, which was the birth of the rave culture.
87. Okay, that's what I thought. So the MDMA came after the free parties and all that, and kind of married. That's what it sort of coalesced in Ibiza then, right?
Yeah, it was more or less those three things, because Shulgin had resynthesized ecstasy and had got out onto the Dallas dance scene and the Dallas club scene. So that was happening, and then the free party scene, and then the house music scene from Ibiza came up, and the three kind of melded together into rave culture.
And then, do you think that now is festival culture? Like, it's turned into, I mean, if you look at the States, I mean, there's festivals all over the place. I mean, this has really exploded from then.
Yeah, I mean, it's a similar kind of a thing. It's not quite the same thing because it's not that. It's more that group experience. There's a group mind experience that happens with rave culture, which is kind of unique, and it's unique, to the music and the drug too. So it's, festivals can be a lot of different things. They can be folk festivals or rock festivals or, bluegrass festivals.
Well, I'm thinking of the EDM festivals.
Yeah, there are quite a few. Yeah, and those are remnants of the rave scene. They're sort of, presenting rave culture in a more commercial format, whereas the original rave culture was about the underground hit and miss parties and running around in the middle of the night with a flyer, So when you commercialize that, it becomes something different. I think a better analogy, a contemporary analogy, would be Burning Man. Burning Man is a huge festival which is co-created by the participants. everything's free, that it's not performances per se. Everybody brings whatever they bring. So they bring performances and workshops and clubs and pubs and dances and raves and everything. And it all comes together in this massive festival in the Nevada desert and Black Rock Desert. And they call it Black Rock City. So that's Burning Man. That's really the contemporary evolution of rave culture, I think.
Yeah, that's a good point. So let's talk a little bit about the confession of the ethical drug dealing then. I mean, you kind of described it in a good summary there. Like you figured out through your travels and everything, sort of the good drugs and the bad drugs. And tell us a little bit about that book.
Well, that was it's a memoir. I call it a psychedelic travelogue and memoir. So it's basically it's basically a 50-year journey. It's 50 years of traveling geographically and psychologically, because I've done a lot of traveling around Europe and Central America and Asia and North America. So I was kind of on the road for about 10 years, and then I've done a lot of traveling since then. Lived in a lot of different countries, had all these experiences, but also parallel with that was my life of psychedelics, which I started when I was 15. And so in one way, it was just a way of telling my story of my life, and also to put a message out there that you can have a long and full and rewarding life while using psychedelics. Like, there's smart drugs and dumb drugs, right? So there's a kind of prevailing idea out there that drugs are bad and drugs are going to mess you up sooner or later, and that's not necessarily true. It hasn't been true for me. I've never had any negative effect from any drug, and I've tried pretty much everything. Never had any downside, never had any addiction problems, never had any issues, never done psychedelics therapeutically because never needed therapy. So, these are things that for me are commonplace. That's my everyday life. And also from most of the people that I've ever known.
Yeah, exactly.
It's also true. And yet the only information you ever get about psychedelics is that they're either going to drive you crazy, or they're only good for therapy, or you're going to get addicted to something, and all these things they've never been true for me. So I wanted to present a life of basically illicit drug use, which has been incredibly positive.
Yeah, and that's changed quite a bit. I mean, now we're looking at especially where you live in Victoria and Vancouver. I mean, I think you can buy most of these drugs kind of legally.
Well, only marijuana.
Not you can't get hard drugs there now, or?
Well, they have it. They just passed a new law actually just a few months ago. Whereas if you're caught with small amounts, like I think it's 3.5 grams, 3.5 grams of anything will not give you a criminal conviction, but will potentially put you into some kind of a program. So the problem is all these people on the streets, and they're talking about crack and cocaine and meth. These are drugs that are a huge problem, and people on the streets are doing them. So rather than bust them and put them in jail and give them fines or whatever, I mean, none of that's going to change anything for them. So now they're referring them to rehab programs and not giving them a criminal record. And it frees up the police too, because they waste a lot of time running around trying to wrestle crack pipes from homeless people. And it's not a very good look for them, and it does no good for anybody else. So they're finally smartening up. Marijuana is completely illegal in Canada. Completely legal, sorry.
Yeah.
Nationally, the second country in the world, next to Uruguay. So that's pretty progressive.
Well, there's mushroom stores there in Vancouver now too.
And they're just getting busted right now. One at a time. Yeah, they're busting them all. They busted 5 of them in Montreal a couple of months ago. And they just busted a couple in Vancouver.
Wow.
It's illegal to sell mushrooms. They're a controlled substance, and there's no medical use, and there's no gray area.
Do you see that? Is it sort of working towards that?
Well, it's going to go the same way. I mean, that's what happened with marijuana, right? People just started selling it and saying, oh, it's medicine. We're a compassion club. wink, wink, come and get your pot. So they did that for a while, and it did create some confusion because people thought, oh, wait a minute, maybe people do need this, and maybe, people's lives are better for it. And so they started looking at it, and eventually that did lead to the legalization of marijuana. And I suspect the same will happen with things like mushrooms.
Yeah.
They'll create, there is a bunch of research going on right now about mushrooms for depression. And there was a study done in Victoria just last year, the year before, with psilocybin in end of life issues. But it was a small study. It was only like 20 people, I think. So it's early days for the research. But once the research gets going, and once they find real medical uses for psilocybin, it will probably eventually become medical mushrooms, like it did medical marijuana, and then it will be recreation after that.
And then it'll be medical MDMA, and
that's right.
What else? What's next?
LSD, DMT, 5-MeO.
Well, I'd like to circle back before we get in, because all those drugs are kind of wonderful and non-habit forming and great. I don't have anything bad to say about any of those things. It's probably just a matter of time before you can get some like DMT as you're crawling into their maid chamber. But what about, you talked before about the crack and the methamphetamine and stuff like that, and over on the West Coast, you guys got that pretty bad. So where does that fit in, and what's the solution for that sort of thing? Because I don't know that arresting people is the best way to do it, but in Calgary, I don't know if you do it there, but in Calgary, what we started doing is we just do like, okay, well, you can come here and do your drugs, and we'll give you clean this and clean that. But then those neighborhoods are just sort of crawling with problems now, and it doesn't seem like that's the right solution. I mean, there's parts of areas of Lethbridge that I won't even go into after dark anymore, and I used to just sort of not worry about that too much. So where do those drugs sort of fit into this? Because I'm very much on the same page with you with all the drugs that you just sort of mentioned. I'm smoking weed as well. We're podcasting. I do shrooms once or twice a year. There may or may not be some DMT in one of the drawers behind me, but those other ones are really ruining lives. And how do those fit in your view of things, and what can we do about them?
Well, I think the first thing to note is that it's not the drugs that are ruining lives, that the lives are ruined, usually through poverty, and usually through abuse, and usually through childhood trauma and psychological issues and mental illness. That's the problem. The only good thing in these, if you're living on the street, the only good thing in your life is a flap of crack or a shot of heroin, because it's the only thing that gets you out of your horrible life and your horrible situation very temporarily. So it's not really a drug problem, it's a mental health problem, I think. So you got to address it at that level. But it's a huge problem here. We got the street fulls of people, living on the street, doing crack and meth openly, and they're all hopelessly addictive. So, there was a huge, where I come from in England, in Crawley, Sussex, there was a huge heroin problem. All the young people were doing heroin, and I knew probably a dozen heroin addicts when I was 15 or 16. And it was getting to be a big problem. What the government did is they legalized heroin, and they assessed the people for their whatever they needed. And I have lots of friends who would go along to the pharmacy every week and get a little bottle of pharmaceutical heroin and a box of syringes, and they'd go back to their little bedsit, and they'd sit on the mattress and they'd read science fiction novels, and they were no bother to anybody. They literally, so there was, the crime went away, the car crime, the house, burglaries, and all these stealing and all these issues, they all just disappeared almost overnight. It was a fantastic success, and anywhere they've tried that, it's worked. So that would be the first thing, is to just assess people for their addictions, give them a prescription. Because one of the problems about addicts on the street, they spend every single waking moment looking for a fix. Their whole life is consumed by finding the next hit and the next, next flap of crack. And so they've got no chance of getting out of their life like that. Once you take that away, they're just sitting around with nothing to do. You have to give them a place to live, too, of course. But once you do that, and that, you know, give them a room and a TV and a prescription.
So you can keep them, but can you keep them in there? I mean, because right now I think part of the problem is they don't want to go against the, you know, the addicts' rights and force them to use in certain spots. They want to let them be free and roam all over the streets. I mean, there's got to be some sort of tough love and like, here's your stuff, but you can't be using it on the, you know, in somebody's doorway.
So you use the court system. You pick them up on possession. You take him to a court. The court says, okay, this guy's addicted to crack. He's been living on the street for 2 years. And the court orders treatment. They say, okay, you're going to go to this place. This is where you're going to live. And it's court ordered, just like punishment. We send people to jail. We have no trouble taking away their rights for breaking the law. So you make a, you know, you just enforce the existing laws, really. And you give them a choice. You say, okay, you can go to jail for 5 years, or you can go and live in this nice little apartment building and have a room, and there'll be a nurse on duty, and you can have a prescription for your drug. What do you want to do?
Yeah.
Would that be like a wean off prescription ideally, or you can just do there and do your drug as long as you want, or does it sort of clean up itself when they're just sort of sitting around bored?
Yeah, ideally they just have time to sit around and think about it. You give them the time to think about it and come to their own conclusion. Because you have to, if you want to quit a drug, you can't. Nobody can do it for you. You have to do it yourself. It has to come from you. You have to have that volition. And if you take away the whole lifestyle around getting the drug, and they're just sitting around with nothing to do, they're just watching TV, and they've got their drug and blah blah, you know, then what are they going to do? Then they start thinking for themselves. Then maybe they'll change their mind, and then their services are available when they need them. But this is a system that has been tried, and it does work. Everywhere it's been tried, in Portugal and England, everywhere they've done it, it's worked. So, you know, I don't know what the problem is. We should be doing that.
Yeah, I was going to ask you. So why? I mean, especially because you live in BC too, and it's sort of, it's kind of on the leading edge of this problem solution. But a lot of money gets injected in there, and it doesn't seem like they really. It seems to be getting worse. There's more overdoses than ever every month. So, why can't they? Why haven't they been able to fix it?
I don't know why people can't change their mind about it, because, you know, I think it just comes down to the thing, well, these people are doing what they want to do, and they should suffer the consequences of their bad decisions and their bad choices. And so it's a kind of, you know, we take a punitive, same with prisons, you know, we put people in prison to punish them. And punishment is not a deterrent. It's never been a deterrent for anything, really. You have to, you know, rehabilitate people or change their minds or inspire them in different ways. And there's many ways to do that, but we just don't seem to be motivated enough to do it. For one thing, it would be a lot cheaper, you know. There's a very good economic argument for this, because the cost of giving them a prescription of these drugs, which are very, very cheap to produce, and just a room, you know, to live in, is, you know, much less of an expense than, you know, the policing and the medical stuff that you need to employ to keep them on the streets, and for all the emergencies and all the costs associated with that, and the cleanup costs. They just spent, you know, like $1 million of them cleaning up this whole area that was taken over by a tent camp. Well, this is a year later, they're all back. It's more than ever. So, you know, when something doesn't work, you need to change your mind about it. But I don't know why governments can't figure this out. It seems to me like it should be an easy enough problem to solve.
Yeah, Portugal's been doing it for quite a while now, a couple decades, I think, right?
Yeah, they don't have thousands of people living in the streets in tents shooting up crack. That doesn't happen. So why not?
Yeah.
And why can't we learn from that? I don't know. It beats me. It's just, you know, I guess we're too dumb. We're too stupid to solve these problems.
Is that the bad drug that you mentioned, like the good drug and the bad drug kind of thing? Do you delineate? Is there a delineation there for you, like cocaine, crack, heroin, bad, MDMA, acid, DMT?
Yeah, so I call it smart drugs and dumb drugs. So
smart drugs.
You know, the smart drugs are ones that improve and enhance your quality of life. They increase your awareness and perception of the world, and therefore increase the quality of your life if they're used properly. Now, the dumb drugs are the ones that decrease your perception and awareness. And that's why people do those drugs, because they don't want to be more aware and more perceptive of their situation, because it really sucks. And that's a painful reality. They want to escape from that. So, you know, the dumb drugs are done for completely the opposite reason that the smart drugs are done. And then there's, you know, smart people doing smart drugs and dumb people doing dumb drugs. But if you're a smart person, you can do a little bit of dumb drugs and get away with it if you're smart enough. And if you're a dumb person, you could potentially do some smart drugs and get a little bit smarter and eventually be a smart person doing smart drugs.
But I mean, couldn't you make the argument that, you know, cocaine, for example, could be good for a while. It could be beneficial for a little bit, but then it gets out of control and it becomes a dumb drug.
Well, anything that gets out of control is a problem, right? But I do believe that any drug can be done responsibly. Some you have to be a lot more responsible than others. But I do believe, I mean, I've tried crack, I've tried crystal meth, you know, and there was never any question that I would become an addict or anything. I do amphetamines sometimes, you know, sometimes I'll do dexedrine. You know, if I go out for a long evening, I'll do 10 milligrams of dexedrine before I go out because it perks me up, sharpens me up, turns me into an intellectual giant. And I have a much better time. I have a great time, right? But I don't do that every day. I don't think you can do anything every day. But I just do it when I need to do it. And there's never, and it is an amphetamine. I mean, it is addictive, but there's no question in my mind that I could ever be addicted to anything, because I'm not willing to let that happen, right? Because I have enough perception and awareness, probably from doing a lot of smart drugs, that prevents me from that risk. Like, it's not a risk for me. For some people, they're much more vulnerable and they're much more high risk. And so those people should stay away. I mean, even psychedelics, you know, anybody with any sort of mental illness or history of psychosis, they shouldn't do psychedelics at all. So you got to know what works for you. And that's really the key point. Is it working for you or is it not?
Yeah, I come from addiction too. I haven't touched a thing in almost 16 years now.
Right.
But cocaine got away from me. So, I mean, I tried all the psychedelics, but I did, you know, I wasn't really doing them with reverence or with sort of awareness. I don't think. It was more of a party thing. And then the cocaine just got away from me to the point where, like, I just lost my choice of staying. I was addicted, and I, you know, had to sort of ask for help and surrender and all that kind of stuff to, you know, and sort of practice abstinence because, like, even me, I was, you know, I'd even think about doing psychedelics again, maybe mushrooms or something, or MDMT, or MDMA. But, you know, I feel like I'd just be like looking forward to that every single weekend or whatever the case may be. I feel like I've crossed that line where I don't even know if it's safe to do anything.
Yeah, well, that's for you to decide, right? And this is what Timothy Leary was talking about in the early 60s, was how to operate your brain. You know, you have to be aware of what effects drugs have, and you have to have that objective perspective on what you're doing, so that it's a positive experience. And if it improves and enhances the quality of your life, it's fine. If it doesn't, if it decreases the quality of your life, then you got to stop doing it.
Yeah. Do you use something specific for writing?
No, I don't. I don't like to be under the influence of anything for writing. My concentration goes. I mean, I could write on amphetamines, but I don't want to, because if I did that, then I'd do too many amphetamines.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, when I write, it takes me a year to write a book, and it's like, 5 hours a day, 5 days a week. So if I associated that kind of time and focus with a drug, I'd be, living on the street in a tent.
Are the tents coming back up out there? I mean, we're kind of in the season where they all sort of head west, probably.
No, they're coming back. I think that's part of the problem with BC, is that the weather is much milder than other places in Canada. And so a lot of the street people, I mean, a couple of years ago, they were saying, okay, we're going to house every single street person. And they did a pretty good job. They got a lot of people off the streets, but then all these people from all over the country flooded in and set up tents on every sidewalk and every, boulevard, thinking that, oh, we're going to get a place to live. And of course, some of them did, but now they're all the residue and all the excess, it's just back to square one. So you've got to deal with the underlying problems, and it's not a drug problem, it's a social problem, I think.
So do you think that getting rid of the institutions in the, when was that, the 70s or the 80s? I mean, your book is like a prime example, right? You're writing about that, and that's not available really to us anymore from when they got rid of it. And when was that, the 80s or the 70s, I think?
Yeah, they closed down all the mental asylums and let everybody out. Bad idea, apparently. Didn't really work out, did it?
Yeah,
I mean, some people do need supervision. You know, they can't look after themselves. They can't make the right decisions. They need to be supervised. I mean, they don't need to be tied up in rooms and hit with a water hose, but they do need a safe place to be and a place where they can get treatment and whatever drugs they need, and then transition from that place back into society. I mean, that's the only real option. That's the only real option that works. You can't just leave mental patients on the street. They're not going to get better there.
You think psychedelics play a part in that, in sort of like a harm reduction way, where people could sort of get refocused on MDMA or LSD or something?
Well, there are programs. I mean, one of the original studies, one of the very first studies done on LSD was in Saskatchewan, and it was Hubert Humphreys and Oswald. These were two psychologists that did studies on LSD and alcoholism. They took the hardest core alcoholics they could find. They put them through this LSD program. Well, everybody that went through that program got massive results. And I saw a recent article where they'd interviewed these people like 50 years after the fact, and they'd never touched a drop since then.
Wow.
So they just completely changed their mind about it. And that's the thing about addiction, is that your mind is stuck. It's stuck on these rails and you cannot get off. So it changes, one of the best things that psychedelics do is they actually change your mind. They change the way you think. And this was incredibly successful. And then, of course, LSD became illegal, and that was it. It was all over. But there are some new studies going on with alcoholism and psilocybin. There's a program in Victoria where they're trying to get opiate addicts off opiates using psilocybin.
Oh, wow.
So they're still getting, I mean, they're, just like they take them off opiates with benzodiazepines too. So just using stepping down over time. So, some of these things work better for some people than others. But all the time you're living in a tent, you're not going to be able to try anything. So
do you think for those people, like for myself, that cross that line, do you think abstinence is a like something that they should desire? I mean, I feel like that's what's missing in a lot of the harm reduction models, is like there's no goal or clear way to actually like stop using.
Well, if you're particularly vulnerable with a certain drug and you find it very, very addictive and irresistible, you definitely need abstinence from that drug. You need to never do that drug again. But that doesn't mean you can never smoke a joint or never do a little bit of mushrooms for a walk through the countryside, because those things are not gonna do the same as cocaine did.
Yeah, that's fine. I don't mind that. I agree with that. But I don't even think there's the goal of abstinence with, like, let's say you're addicted to heroin or trank or something. Like, I think like they just want to keep sort of providing enough for them to keep on it. I don't know, until they die, basically. That seems like that's what's happening.
No, I think the goal should be obviously to fade it out, because but if you're a hardcore addict, you can't just take it away. You can go into a coma and die if you're an opium addict, or an opiate addict. It can be really, that's why they take you off slowly through the medical rehab thing. They do it through benzos, and just take you down slowly and try and mitigate the withdrawal symptoms. But once once you've taken it down, the goal, of course, should be to get it out of your life and then never do it again. Yeah. Like they say with alcohol too, if you're a hopeless alcoholic, you should never have a drink, because one drink is never going to be enough. You can't trust yourself to have a glass of wine with dinner, which is not going to do you any harm, right? But it may trigger your addiction again, and and put you back into trouble. So no, abstinence should always be the goal if a drug has been a real problem in your life, because you don't want the problem.
Yeah. Darren, do you have any questions or comments?
What was your first psychedelic experience?
First one, well, I guess it was pot, hash. Going behind the pub when I was 15 years old and smoking hash for the first time. So I described that experience in the book. But I guess even before that, it started with my grandfather and my father taking me to a beer garden and giving me a pint of beer when I was 14 and saying, "Get that down you, it's good for you." So that was my introduction to mind-altering substances, quickly followed by hashish. And then not long after that, LSD. I actually describe a very bad LSD trip. I've only had one negative experience with drugs, and that was the first time I did LSD when I was 16 years old. I did a massive.
Sorry, do you think there was a reason for that? Do you think there was?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Can you take?
Well, the reason was I didn't know what LSD was. I didn't know what it was going to do. It was a tiny, tiny, tiny little thing that you could barely even see. It was a purple microdot, which is like 300 or 400 mics of really, really pure acid. So yeah, I did this thing, and I thought it was just going to be, some giggles or something. So it was a very, very profound experience. I thought it was dead. I thought it was a lizard. I thought, I thought it was insane. And it went on and on and on and on at 12 hours. Finally, I came down and thought, man, I'm never going to do another drug again. And I didn't really do anything for probably a year or two after that. And then I learned more about it. I read Leary and Ram Dass and, the Wasson and all the psychedelic literature. And then I realized, okay, so that's what's going on. And I was much better prepared the next time. But, it was, and I put it in the book because it was the only negative experience I've ever had. But it was also just to, illustrate the fact that if you do everything wrong, setting, your mind space, the pure drugs and all these guidelines that Leary was on about so early on. Setting was his big thing. Your mindset's got to be right and your environment's got to be right, where every single, guideline was the opposite for my first LSD trip. And that's why it was a bad trip. But it's actually, not that common to have that type of bad trip, because usually, these days, there's so much information. Everybody knows about these things, right? And it's not hard to get there. You can just Google it, right? So back then, nobody knew anything.
What about different cultures? Like in the UK, like you're saying you grew up and you had a beer when you were 14, your parents gave it to you.
Yeah.
It seems like Europe is much more sort of free about that. You can still go to the park and drink wine in the public. Like there's a whole, it seems like kids would be having wine in Europe too. And you come to America and it's like 21. And you're not supposed to drink till you're 21. It seems very strict in that regard. It's like, do you think there's an opposite sort of a reverse psychology reaction that's happening there?
I don't know. Maybe it came from, the North America's puritanical background, because it does, famously come from the Puritans and, the religious people that came over and started colonialism and whatnot. So I think part of it is that. And another part, it's just hard to change laws. But they are much more lax about it. But even in Mexico, I've seen women put red wine in the baby's bottle, like just a little bit in the bottle and shake it up, just to chill out the baby. So that happens. But yeah, it's quite common for kids to drink beer. When I grew up, I was 14. When I was 14 years old, I was going to the pub every Friday night, every Saturday night, and every Sunday lunchtime. And we would drink anywhere between 10 and 14 pints of beer. Yeah. The pub opened at 6 and closed at 10. So you had 4 hours. So you drink a pint every 15 minutes. It's crazy. And all my school friends were there with me. We were all 14. There were teachers in the pub, teachers that knew us from class. And they never, nobody cared.
Yeah, it's such a different culture with all the pubs there. I was in Dundalk, Ireland for a few months, and there was so many little pubs. That's just what people hung out in the pubs. They didn't go to each other's houses. They just went to the pubs. It's a totally different culture than And
That's
here,
right.
where there's so far to go, you just stay in your home and you sort of visit more in your home than outside.
Yeah, it's true. It was a community hub. Like everybody went to the pub, usually, and Sunday lunchtimes, and but also Friday and Saturday nights was the big one, and then during the week as well. It's like it's a pub culture, but it's a social thing. You're not going there to get drunk. You're going there because everybody is there.
Exactly.
And your family's there, your grandmother's there, your kids are there,
Must be why you guys developed that sense of humor.
It's yeah, all half drunk. No, it is a big drinking culture though, and it has become a problem over the years. I think people, also it seems to be my father drank the same amount as I did for 50, 60 years, and didn't seem any worse the wear for it, because his attitude was that this was just normal. He didn't think it was a bad. Nobody thought it was a bad thing. Everybody thought it was great. I mean, in the 50s, they didn't even think smoking was bad for you. So maybe you're protected by your belief system to some degree.
Yeah, to some degree, yeah. I mean, they say it's progressive. That's kind of what happened with me. It was progressive, but if it doesn't progress, then it can probably be managed pretty good.
Yeah, and for some people more than others, right? I mean, some people are probably hypersensitive to these things, and some people are just completely immune to them.
Is alcoholism less of a problem over there, and like the binge drinking and stuff like that we see over here?
I'm not sure. I would suspect it's kind of similar.
What about, why do you think they haven't, how is cannabis and all that so illegal over there? Do you see that changing anytime soon? Or it just seems weird to me that you couldn't get weed anywhere over there. Even, is it medically okay even?
No, there's no medical marijuana. There's no compassion clubs. There's no, there's not even any movement really towards that. So, no, I think they're a long ways off. They're a long ways off legalizing marijuana. They basically swing backwards and forwards between the Conservative Party and the Labour Party, where the Conservative Party, thinks it's immoral, and the Labour Party, it's just going to get in the way of your workday. So neither one are kind of, open to the idea.
Do you think it's coming to America full bore, like the whole, at a national level?
Yeah, it will eventually. Because it's taken exactly the same route as here. In fact, the model here was based on a movement called Sensible Colorado, and they started a movement there, and they said, okay, we're just going to legalize it instead of trying to get the federal laws changed. We're just going to legalize it on a local level. So the municipalities started to just not enforce the laws, and that's how it started, and that's how the medical marijuana thing started. And Canada took up that same model and took it all the way to national legalization. But I think it's inevitable, because most of the states now have either medical marijuana or recreational marijuana on a state level. And there are still, and they've even started changing federal laws now. There's a federal banking law that you couldn't have a bank account for marijuana business, because it was federally illegal. And now they've changed that. So now you can have because the banking system is federally, governed. So now you can. So there's chinks in the armor, and it's changing slowly. And eventually they will have legal recreational on a national level, I think.
I want to get into your new book, but I keep wanting to stay on the topic of drugs and stuff.
You mean The End of Everything?
Yeah, that book.
By Jimi Fritz, available at fine bookstores everywhere.
Yeah. What do you think?
An ironic black comedy.
Before we get into that, what do you think about the exodus to South America for ayahuasca and all that kind of, all the shamanic type stuff?
I think the shamanic type stuff is mostly just nonsense.
I think I'm getting to realize that Fritz in your book is you.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's probably true. I think, if you're a writer, I think all the characters that you write about are you. Because where else does it come from? Yeah, Fritz in the book, in The End of Everything by Jimi Fritz, an ironic black comedy available at bookstores everywhere, is like me on steroids with no breaks.
It's pretty funny. I mean, what made you write a novel like that after the two other books you did?
Well, because I like to rant about things, and I, have gatherings at my house every Friday where I'm famous for ranting about this, that, and the other thing. So I wanted to get some very, very concise, precise rants down. And I thought, how can I frame that in a book? And I thought, I know, I'll have a character in a mental asylum plotting his own suicide while ranting about the world. So that was the idea. And that's what I did.
Yeah, it was very well done. I mean, it was really funny. I was laughing to myself a couple times out loud, and I thought of Darren a couple times because your character was, ranting about the democracy and the 80% of the people being idiots and stuff. And
87% moron theory.
Could you expand on that?
Well, the theory is that 87% of all human beings are basically morons and cannot be trusted to make a decision in a democracy about anything, on account of knowing nothing about economics or foreign policy or social order or anything. So, there's the problem. Therein lies the problem with democracy, is you've got 87% of the population who are morons voting governments in. So who do they vote in? Morons. I rest my case.
Well, I mean, that's almost an argument for the feudal system. I mean, people starting to think it was maybe we tried democracy before. We went back to kings and shit for a reason. It's because it's like, I don't know. It depends on your king, I guess, but a king is probably more apt to defend his borders, maybe, or to make sure hopefully his subjects are fed and happy so they don't come and burn his castle down and all those sorts of things. But at least you have a guy to go after when the shit's going down.
Yeah. Well, that's the benevolent dictator theory, where maybe the most effective form of it is a benevolent dictator. So they have the best interest at heart, but they also have total power to do stuff. I think that we can fine tune democracy to work. I think it is the best of the worst, but I think there should be some basic testing program, like licensing to drive a car. We don't let anybody just get into a car and hit the roads. We license them. They have to prove they can drive a car. So maybe you have to, do a test and just prove that the basics of economics and foreign policy and the things that you're going to vote this person to do, because you should have some understanding about what they're going to do. And if you don't, maybe you shouldn't be voting.
Yeah, it's just keeping that training nonpartisan. I don't know. I can't picture how that mandatory training would be nonpartisan.
Well, I mean, not advocating certain policies, but just learning how the system works and what the consequences are of different policies.
Yeah.
Because people have no idea. I mean, in England, they voted for Brexit. They voted to leave the EU. It was just an awful, terrible decision. And it was made because people had no idea what the consequences were. No clue at all. They just voted, emotionally because they didn't like foreigners.
Or because they don't like unelected leaders in the EU running things?
No, they didn't want to be ruled by Brussels. They didn't want to be ruled by foreigners. And they didn't want foreigners making rules in England. So, it was basically a xenophobia. But they didn't understand about how the EU worked and what the benefits are of that economic system. And that it gives you, much greater. They didn't realize they were going to lose their EU passports. They didn't realize they were going to not be able to work in any European countries anymore. And all these things. They had no idea what they were voting for.
You still feel like they made the wrong decision?
Oh, I know they made the wrong decision.
After this many years of seeing what's happening in the world?
Yeah, I mean, I think they'd be better off in the EU.
Yeah.
But they may even join again. It's quite possible if they have a Labour government, they'll join again. But whether the EU will have them back now, I don't know. Maybe not.
Yeah, exactly.
They might say, "Hey, you want it out? You're out. See you later."
Yeah. So Fritz was pretty skeptical, and it was a bit surprising to me because I thought, if this is you and you've been through these psychedelic journeys and the traveling, like he was pretty sort of atheistic and skeptical.
Yes, absolutely. I am also very skeptical and very atheistic. Surprisingly enough.
Yeah. But I mean, does it seem like a rare thing if you've, been through all the psychedelics and that whole culture?
I don't think you have to. I don't think you have to believe in the supernatural to believe in the psychological, power of psychedelics. I think psychedelics are going to prove to be a fantastic tool in terms of psychopathology, in terms of the psychedelic psychotherapy revolution, which is happening right now, because they do have this ability to completely change your mind, to make you think in different ways, to make you give you the ability to solve problems in uniquely creative ways. They can influence you to be more creative and more focused, and all these things are massively popular. But you're not going to different dimensions and talking to aliens.
Well, no, but I was going to say that's what you hear about. I mean, you hear about people doing DMT and they meet like whether God or some one love or one thing, and they're just like,
Yeah, well, you hear about people seeing the Virgin Mary, appear in their living room too, and they get abducted by aliens. You hear all kinds of this. We're back to the 87% moron theory. Just because people think things, it doesn't mean that's true. There's certainly no evidence to support any of that. There's no evidence at all for any type of supernatural realm at all. There never has been. Only the imagination of 87% of the population.
There's lots of evidence for past lives.
There isn't. Not a jot.
Yeah, sure there is.
Well, only what people say. Only the imagination of human beings. That's not evidence for anything. In fact, any scientific experiment screens out the influence of human beings and their beliefs and their opinions.
It's not proof, but it's evidence.
What evidence of what?
Well, it's anecdotal evidence. I would say that you're probably right that there's no proof. But
the lowest form of evidence is anecdotal.
Yeah.
So you can almost dismiss it. It's sometimes an indication to look further, like if everybody says something has happened, and then you look at it.
Yeah, exactly.
Psychic phenomenon has been studied for 100 years. Paranormal activity has been studied for 100 years. Randy, the amazing Randy, he had $1 million prize. Anybody that can prove any psychic
he was a fraud. Randy was a fraud. You can't bring up Randy. He was a fraud.
Why was he a fraud?
In the end. Well, didn't he get busted for a bunch of unethical stuff in the end anyways?
No.
And he was sort of cheating in that whole prize thing. I mean, look,
he wasn't cheating. He wasn't cheating at all. How was he cheating? He was catching the cheaters.
I don't.
He put up $1 million prize, and he said anybody that can prove paranormal activity or any type of psychic ability, then they could get $1 million. And the $1 million was there. And they worked it out together, the protocol. They both had to agree on the protocol and the test. And if somebody said that they could do telekinesis or whatever, then they would set up an experiment and they'd say, okay, let's see you do it.
I heard he just kept moving the goalposts or something.
No, he never moved a goalpost. He did this in the late 70s. It was exactly the same goalposts until he died.
I thought he was doing it in the 90s, and even
did it all the way through the 80s and 90s. He started on a radio show, and somebody called in and he said, "Well, if you can prove a psychic ability, I'll give you $100,000." Well, that 100,000 over the next 25 years became $1 million, and it stopped when he died. They shut it down because you can go to the website now, randy.org. And you can see thousands of reports of all these tests that were done with tarot readers and psychics and aura readers and blah, blah, blah. Every one of them failed the test 100% of the time. What does that tell you?
I don't believe his testing. I mean, I've also read a lot of studies and on all kinds of phenomena that they've also proven the opposite. So
no,
Randy wasn't going to let anything pass. I mean, I think his background is even suspect. But
his background is as an entertainer. He was a magician.
Yeah, there you go.
Well, what's wrong with that? He was an entertainer. He never claimed to be. He claimed to be a magician, like with magic tricks. He didn't claim that they were supernatural abilities.
Yeah, no, I know. That's what I'm.
And he would reproduce the spoon bending and the psychic readings, and he could reproduce any of those effects.
Yeah, with his dry reading and stuff. Yeah, I mean, I just think that whole movement there in the early 2000s, they would do is ridicule people that had legitimate experiences in their own mind, at least, and they would put them in buckets to ignore them. And
Randy was a true gentleman, and he was very polite to everybody. And they designed the test together. They both agreed that it would prove or disprove their ability in 100% of the cases, in thousands and thousands of events.
Alrighty.
Not one person passed the test.
Okay. Well, just
where does the placebo effect fit into that?
Huh?
Where does the placebo effect fit into that?
Well, there's no placebo effect. If you say that you can, astral travel, and you go to
no, I don't mean the placebo effect for astral travel, but doesn't the placebo effect?
Well, a psychic.
I mean, I don't know if it alludes to a psychic ability, but it does seem to allude that we have powers outside of what science prescribes to us.
No, so placebo effect is very, very well understood by science. It's been very, very well understood. It's it's a real thing. It's a psychological effect. It happens. It's not very, it happens in a small amount of people. It's usually 10 to 13% will get an effect from something, but it's an impression that they get. You're not going to shrink a tumor with a placebo effect. You're not going to cure diabetes 1 with a placebo effect. You're not going to have any direct physical response. The placebo effect is a psychological effect that makes you feel better. So the people say, "Oh yeah, I feel a little bit better now." That's because it's a placebo effect. Even if you give them milk powder, they say, "Yeah, my headache went away." Well, their headache went away because it was going away, but
But they've had to engineer in even a double blind where the evidence isn't accepted unless even the doctor doesn't know.
Yeah, double blind test will also pursue. Well, one of the groups is placebo.
So the placebo doesn't go into the healing at all. It's just really like a sort of a.
It doesn't have any physiological effect.
Are you sure about that?
Yeah, I'm sure about that.
I thought that was the whole point of the placebo, is that that something is happening because of the power of your belief that something is working. And
well, something does happen, but it's because you change your mind. And here we go with psychedelics again, because they can do the same thing.
Yeah.
Like if you have pain, there's pain responses. Like back pain is a common one. You get this pain signal that's going and going and going long after the injury is healed. That's almost a glitch in the system where it keeps giving you this pain. Well, placebo effect could get rid of that. Yeah. So could counseling, so could hypnosis, so could psychedelics, anything that can change your mind, because that pain is going, it's a psychological effect. So you can decrease pain with a placebo effect because, you can do that just with your mind without any placebo. Right, you can just sit there and you can will it away. You can bring up your blood pressure a little bit up and down and stuff like this. So you do have a little bit of power there. But like I say, you're not gonna cure your pancreatic cancer with a placebo.
Right.
Well, we have seen guys change their body temperature, do some pretty crazy stuff. Before we run out of time, Jimmy, I gotta ask: you're not secretly plotting your suicide, are you?
Yes. No, I am. I've already planned it. I'm going to have this big party. I've got this beautiful gazebo in my backyard, which is lit up with psychedelic lighting. I'm going to have a party in that gazebo. And then I'm going to get the doc to come over in the morning and shoot me up. And I'm going to make a final video announcement and drive traffic to my website, which is www.jimifritz.ca. Everything's there. I got music, I got books, I got 5 albums, I've got music videos, I got films, whatever. Jimifritz.ca, and then I'm going to peg out on YouTube. And I told my friend about this, who's 94 years old, and he said, "Well, that sounds like a fantastic idea. I think I'm going to do that." And I said, "Okay, well, if you want to do it here, you can do it." So he did it 2 weeks ago in my gazebo.
Wow.
Yeah.
So is he part of the MAID stats then, or?
Yes. Yeah, he got made. The doctor came and we had a big party with all his family and friends. And
he's a made man.
Oh yeah, he was a made man. He was
That's a
very
good
happy
way
to
to.
go.
That's a good way to go. So when are you planning on this?
Oh, not for a while. Not until I
Yeah,
need to. Not
yeah,
until
but
life
I was
becomes
gonna say you seem
unbearable.
pretty. Yeah, I was gonna say you seem pretty happy.
Right now, life is pretty sweet. So nowhere in the near future. But when the time comes, I'm not going to be, I'm not going to deteriorate to the grave. I'm not going to go into a home. I'm not going to be wheeled around in a chair or spoon fed or any of that. So long before any of that happens, I will
right.
egg out gracefully
Yeah,
and on my own terms.
right on. Do you are you
and on
planning
YouTube.
and
They
on
might
yeah?
they might block that. I mean, YouTube might not allow that.
Well, we'll see.
I
So
guess
do
it
you-
doesn't matter if you get
Leak it onto the dark net as soon as possible.
Yeah, exactly. It'll be part of Faces of Death. The new Faces of Death.
Yeah, yeah.
So are you doing any music in the future? Any more books in your writing? Are you
I'm working
gonna
on
do
a new album right now.
you're not gonna do like Fritz in the Afterlife, like realizing that there is an afterlife and like
Yeah.
there is a metaphysical reality.
Yeah, the sequel on the other side, right? No, I don't. Actually, probably won't write any more books. It's virtually impossible to sell a book for a start, and it's a big commitment of time and energy.
Yeah.
And I've really enjoyed writing the books I've written, and I don't think I'll write any more because, like I say, there's no real reason to.
Yeah, yeah. But music.
Music, definitely. I mean, I'll never stop playing music. I'm working on a new album now, which is one song, which is 40 minutes long.
Nice.
And it goes through many, many changes. And I got string sections in it and transitions and French horns and piano. And I'm playing all the instruments.
Right on.
So that's going to be fun.
Is that your favorite? Is that your favorite music?
Which music?
Is the music your favorite sort of art?
It is at the moment. Whatever I'm doing is my favorite. I think. If I'm making films, and that's it's all consuming, right? You get. I think you have to. For any creative endeavor, you have to get completely immersed in it, right? So whatever I'm involved in is my favorite thing. Right now, it's music again. So I do have 5 albums on my website at jimifritz.ca. So
Jimmy,
you can play them right from there. It's pretty cool.
You can download them for free from there.
Yeah.
Well, Jimmy, this has been great.
All right.
Hours flown by. Where can people find your stuff?
Jimifritz.ca. That's jimifritz.ca.
Is that with an I or a Y?
The book is really good. I mean,
Y. I, sorry. Jimmy.
An I and one M,
J-I-M-I.
right?
You can see it on the screen there.
I pictured the book as like a little movie. I mean, really easy to visualize the characters, and it was very funny. So
I was kind of hoping it would get picked up as a limited series or something.
Yeah, exactly.
Some wacky comedian actor as Fritz, and then you could have new characters every week coming in and out of the mental asylum. It'd be hilarious.
Yeah, exactly. He's trying to collect all his drugs for his suicide.
Yeah.
Do you have any social media, anything like that people can follow you on?
Just my website is the best thing, jimifritz.ca. That's where all my stuff is there, and you can contact me through there.
Right on. Thanks.
I don't have a Twitter account or an Instagram or a TikTok or any of that because I hate that shit.
Yeah, stay away from that, or you might be planning your maid a little quicker than you thought.
So that's where the 87% live.
Seems like it. It does seem like it.
Yeah. All right, buddy.
Well,
Thanks a lot.
it's been great. Here's
Okay,
hoping
cheers.
that
Thanks a lot.
your,
Don't forget to send me the link.
Yeah.
Okay.
And here's hoping your death party is a long ways off.
Peace out.
Okay. Yeah.
And that was our chat with Jimi Fritz. What'd you think?
Oh yeah, that was fun. Yeah, it was good. Yeah, I kind of thought that might have been based on his real character, and I was like, oh, he sounds really skeptical. You know what? It's been a long time since I've actually heard those arguments. That actually, it's been so long that I thought they were no longer valid. So I wish I would have
your own world over there, eh, buddy.
What?
You live in your own world over there, eh?
Yeah.
Podcast. You don't have to worry about reality.
Oh no, that's not reality. So
no, I don't say I agree with it either, but
yeah,
you make some good points.
Yeah.
Big thanks to Jimmy for coming on the show. Big thanks to you guys for listening. Hey, even bigger thanks if you choose to support our work over at grimerica.ca. support if you're getting some value from the show, from the 600 and what is it, 36? Is it past that now? 600 and something. It's 600 and a lot. So head over to grimerica.ca/support. Sign up today. So make a monthly or one-time donation or whatever you can do. Helps us stay in business over here. Keep the show going. Keep the power flowing, the internet on. grimericaoutlaw.ca if you want to get into our other stuff. A little more political, a little darker, a little more controversial. Contact at thecabin.com for the trips. Adultbrain.ca, we got the audiobook podcast and the audiobooks. Did I forget anything?
Well, just maybe this month's free audiobooks on the podcast.
What are they? Oh, yeah, we're doing
Malleus Maleficarum. That's the Hammer of Witches from like the 1500s, the Catholic Church. And the vampire stories, 25, I think it's 25, right? 25 old vampire tales, like from from the 1800s. And the other one was
Christianity.
Yeah, Rudolf Steiner. Christianity is a mystical fact. So those three are free in our podcast. And
Jimi Fritz would not like that book.
No, he wouldn't like most of them, I don't think.
He wouldn't like most of our books. Maybe he like it.
Naturally.
All right, guys. Thanks for listening. Happy New Year. We love you, and we'll see you next week.